So to be the world's reserve currency, Carol, that is not just an honor. It has real responsibility connected to it. You're supposed to take care of that dollar because it's gold for all the countries and businesses all around the world. So there's something stable the world can count on. And we generally did pretty well with that here and there. But we have, with reckless abandonment since 2008, we have destroyed the value of the dollar. And then on top of it, we started weaponizing when we went to war with Russia. We decided we were going to weaponize that dollar, take their ability to use any dollars. Is that the move of a fascistic dictator?
100%. And this was done without Congress. This is something that I wrote about in You Will Own Nothing, that we are going to look back at history and say this was a key turning point in the shift of the global financial order. Because, as you said, it is a privilege to have the world reserve currency. We have food and other commodities, energy that are priced in dollars all across the world. And in order to be able to purchase those, other countries must keep dollar-denominated currency, usually in the form of our treasuries, in reserves. And so what the U.S. did, along with the central banks of Europe and Japan, they got together and said, we are going to freeze Russia's access to their reserves. Now, who wants to allow the U.S. the privilege of being the reserve currency, which, by the way, holds down inflation and lets the government be able to spend at a very low financing cost? Who wants to do that if at their own whim, the United States can just say, no, we don't want you to have access to this money that you've invested in, to these reserves and assets that you've invested in. We're just going to freeze them. On top of that, Glenn, right now, there's discussion led by the U.S. amongst the G7 countries, which is supposed to happen more formally in about 2 weeks. And what they're trying to do is find a way to, quote unquote, legally seize these reserves. So $300 billion worth of these Russian reserves that are frozen, take them, and you'll love this one, use it either for or in Ukraine. So yes, this is not something that Congress voted on. This is something that is done by the administrative state. And this is something that threatens the U.S.'s economic and national security and standing in terms of the global economy and their pole position in terms of the global economy. It is absolutely insane to think about. Most people haven't even heard of this.
Did you hear about, I'm trying to find this story, it came out today, about, I think it was the president of FedEx that warned about what this administration was doing to the dollar and how it was going to affect us, and that America and Americans will lose their lifestyle quickly, and it's not coming back.
Yeah, so this was actually from JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon. He said that the U.S. debt crisis is the most predictable crisis in history. It's something that, not only have the rating agencies downgraded the debt, but the CBO, the Fed, the IMF, and the Treasury have all said the debt is on an unsustainable fiscal path. And what they've done, Glenn, that I don't think people have appreciated is they have window dressed the economy. This idea that we have this growth, that was done by maintaining a historical deficit to GDP. Normally, when you have growth, you have more revenue that's flowing into the government, and so that creates lower deficits. They have done the opposite. They are running deficits to GDP that are more than 2 times the historical average, and using that debt, which, by the way, is at 15-year high levels, and using that expensive debt to go ahead and finance the appearance of growth. This is going to make inflation sticky for longer. This is taking away economic opportunity from the private sector and throwing it into the government sector, and this is going to impact long-term economic freedom. Again, completely insane, things that we have never seen before in history.
So is there any good news anywhere here on, how do people make it? Biden is using debt to make it appear that, everything is fine, but it's not.
Yeah.
So what do people do that are struggling with massive debt themselves?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to say, oh, well, the government is behaving this way. We're going to behave differently. It's why we have record household debt. We have record credit card debt. We have credit card delinquencies, which are increasing at a rapid pace, more than 50% on a year-over-year basis. It's a very demoralizing time. And, from a country perspective, there are only a few ways that we can solve this. One is by taking away the barriers to productivity and having true productivity and letting us as a country grow our way out of it. That's the most optimistic way to do this. Unfortunately, this administration isn't going to go ahead and do that. Another thing is to restructure spending, which we know, whether it's coming from the administration or Congress, nobody has the backbone to do that. The other option is debt. And if that is allowed to continue, again, it's going to end up stoking massive inflation. So we need more people to raise their voices, because here's the thing, Glenn, everybody knows this, but nobody has the political will to shift it, because people have not put enough pressure on their representatives. They have not shamed them. They have not marched on Washington about this. So while people say, yeah, I'm struggling, they are not taking it to the point that it threatens the political power of the people who are supposed to, quote unquote, represent us. And until they feel like their jobs are at risk, nothing is going to be done.
So you know what, Carol, I was thinking the other day, and I'd love your opinion on this, and you don't have to give it to me because this is shooting from the hip here, and you're far too smart to do that.
Zone with you, Glenn.
Right. But I was thinking the other day, we used to say China is owning us, or Japan is going to own us, when Japan was growing. And we worried about all the debt we were taking out from China. Well, China's selling all that debt. We don't really have the meanie China breathing down our neck and saying, you got to pay now. The biggest one that we owe now is the Federal Reserve, which is the 5 biggest banks. And if I was putting together, this is me in fiction world, if I'm writing a fictional story about America and destroying it, and going into some sort of a fascistic world where business and the countries are all run together. And the first thing I would do was allow the Federal Reserve to just take on debt that you knew they couldn't pay. So at some point when they would default on it, I would say, well, I'm going to have to take your resources. I'm going to take some of your land. I'm going to take this and that as payment on this debt because you can't pay. Then everything that they want to happens. You can control the land, you can control the water, you control the air, you control everything. And again, it's the same damn banks that we keep bailing out over and over and over again. This seems like a really big heist.
I mean, certainly, I think there are a lot of potential heists out there. I talked about, and You Will Own Nothing, all of the assets that are set to just basically turn over from one generation to another. So they could do it in a very easy manner by some sort of estate tax or the quote unquote wealth tax. So there are a lot of different options. I think where you started this is such an important point. There is not an external boogeyman here. This is not China's fault. This is not Russia's fault. It's not anybody's fault. This was an entirely internally created situation. And You're right. There are lots of different ways this could go. It could go the manner of a CBDC, a different way to try to control us and control our resources. But the reality is, But
wait, the first two letters of that explain who has control.
Exactly.
CBDC, Central Bank Digital Currency. Exactly. One way or another, it comes back to them.
Exactly, because it's all about centralizing our resources at the end of the day. So a lot of different ways that it can play out, and we need to be the ones to push back and say enough, because even though the left doesn't want you to believe in math is very discrete, and there are only so many ways things can go and add up.
Yep.
We have to believe in math.
I don't know if you took Common Core. You don't. Carol, thank you so much. I appreciate it.